There is a time of day when the mirror reveals a cruel truth. Not the bathroom mirror, that one lies shamelessly. The other one. The invisible mirror that forms when someone stops in the middle of the rush, takes a deep breath, and asks themselves, how did I get here? The question echoes in the emptiness of tidy apartments, among framed diplomas and plants that someone said would bring well-being. It echoes in the corridors of air-conditioned offices, where people perform tasks with mechanical precision, smile at the right moments and respond fine when someone asks how they are. It echoes on social media, where real life becomes a rehearsed performance, where every photo is a carefully edited lie. And at the center of this collective charade, a discovery looms. The person in the mirror is not who we expected to find. It's not paranoia. It's not a midlife crisis. It's something much deeper and more disturbing. It's the gradual realization that, at some point in life, we stop deciding who we are. Other voices began to speak for us. Other hands began to write the script. And we, like obedient actors, memorized our lines and took to the stage. The pain doesn't come from failure. It comes from success in something we never chose. It comes from perfection in playing a character we don't recognize. It comes from the terrible discovery that we have built an entire life on foundations that are not ours. Our parents told us how to be. School taught us how to think. Society defined how to act. Friends showed us how to behave. Work determined how to live. And somewhere in the midst of this barrage of instructions, our own voice was silenced. Not violently, that would have been easier to notice. It was a gradual seductive silencing, rewarded with approval and applause. That's how you build a perfect prison, by making the prisoner believe that the bars are protection. Jean-Paul Sartre would look at this daily theater and say something that would make your blood run cold. Man is condemned to be free, condemned because freedom is not a gift. It is a burden. It is responsibility. It is the terrifying obligation to choose who to be at every moment, knowing that there is no manual, no guarantee, no excuse. But there is something even more disturbing about this story. Something that Sartre perceived with surgical clarity and that Alice, lost in Wonderland, discovered in the most painful way possible. Sometimes we prefer the prison of lies to the terror of authenticity. Because being true hurts. It takes courage. It requires giving up masks, applause, and the approval of others. It requires looking in the mirror, the real one, and accepting that we may have spent years living someone else's life. The question is not whether this has happened to you. The question is how much longer it will take you to admit that yes, it has. And that maybe it's time to find out who you really are when no one is watching, when no one is judging, when no one is applauding. Alice's white rabbit carried a pocket watch and muttered obsessively, "I'm late. I'm late." It's no coincidence that Lewis Carroll chose this image to open the most famous fall in literature. Because the rabbit is not an animal. It's a symbol. It's modern anxiety personified, running in circles, always late for appointments that no one really knows what they are. Look around. The white rabbit is everywhere. It's in the alarm clock that rings at 6 in the morning so someone can get to work at 8 to do things that could be done in 3 hours but stretch out to 8 because that's how it works. It's in the busy schedule of meetings about meetings where people discuss problems they themselves have created to justify their professional existence. It's in the "I don't have time" that has become the automatic response to any invitation that involves stopping, breathing, feeling. I don't have time to read. I don't have time to talk. I don't have time to think. As if time was something that someone stole from us, rather than something we hand over on a silver platter to invisible masters we never question. But there is something more sinister about this rush. The white rabbit is not just in our schedules, it is in the very mental structure of modern society. It is what makes us believe that stopping is failure, that questioning is a waste of time, that reflecting is a luxury for those without responsibilities. How many times have you heard someone say, "Stop philosophizing and go do something useful"? As if thinking about your own existence were a waste of time. As if questioning the meaning of things were intellectual laziness. As if blindly rushing around were more noble than the search for authenticity. The white rabbit is more than just haste. It is the illusion that there is a place to get to, an ultimate goal, a supreme objective that once achieved will make everything worthwhile. It is the lie that makes us run our whole lives after something we cannot define, but which we promise ourselves we will find one day. Sartre would observe this rush and point out the absurdity with clinical precision. The rabbit is not late for anything. There is no final destination. The rush is just a way to avoid confronting freedom, because stopping means choosing, and choosing means taking responsibility for who we are and who we are not. It's easier to chase the white rabbit than to admit a devastating truth. We don't know where we're going because we never stop to decide where we want to go. A busy schedule becomes a shield against the fundamental question, The cell phone that never stops vibrating becomes a smokescreen to hide the existential void. The constant rush becomes anesthesia to numb the weight of freedom of choice. And there's more. Society rewards this rush. It praises those who are always busy. It celebrates those who have no time for anything. It turns exhaustion into a badge of honor. Wow, how do you manage to do all that? As if living on the edge of exhaustion were a virtue. The white rabbit has become a social status. Always being on the run means being important. Having a busy schedule means being necessary. Not having time for yourself means being productive. It is a perverse reversal of values that transforms alienation into achievement. And so, like Alice, we follow the white rabbit down the hole. Not because we want to find out where it's going, but because having a rabbit to follow is more comfortable than recognizing that we are the ones who must decide the path. But here lies a secret that few realize. The white rabbit does not exist outside of us. We created it. We feed it with our haste, our anxiety, our refusal to stop and question. It is real because we choose it to be real. The cruelest thing is that the white rabbit feeds on our fear of freedom. Sartre knew this. He realized that human beings have a frightening tendency to flee from their own autonomy. It is easier to follow instructions than to create your own path. It is safer to obey schedules than to decide how to use your time. It is less terrifying to chase after other people's goals than to discover what really matters. And if that is true, if the rabbit is our creation, then we can also choose to stop following it. We can choose to question where all this rushing is taking us. We can choose to discover who we are when we are not chasing after anything or anyone. But that requires something that modern society has taught us to avoid. It requires the courage to be alone with our thoughts, without distractions, without rushing, without excuses. It requires the courage to discover that maybe, just maybe, the person who appears in that silence is very different from the one running after imaginary white rabbits. And maybe that's exactly the person who's waiting to be found. Alice drinks the mysterious liquid and shrinks to the size of an ant. She eats the cake and grows until she hits her head on the ceiling. She goes up and down, big and small, giant and insignificant, in a desperate oscillation that any modern adult would recognize instantly. Because we all do it. Every day. On Monday, someone compliments a project at work, and for a few hours there is a feeling of being special, competent, deserving of recognition. Self-esteem inflates like a balloon. You walk through the corridors with a discreet smile, answering emails with renewed confidence, planning the future with optimism. On Tuesday, a subtle criticism in a meeting or a snide comment from a colleague, and that's it. The balloon deflates. The same person who yesterday felt invincible now questions every word they said, every decision they made, every gesture they made. The feeling of smallness is so intense that it makes you want to hide under the desk. This is not emotional instability. It is conditioning. It is the result of a lifetime of learning that self-worth depends on the opinions of others. Sartre would observe this pathetic dance and diagnose it accurately. Bad faith. The unconscious decision to hand over the power to define who we are to other people. It is more comfortable to let others tell us if we are good or bad, competent or incompetent, worthy or unworthy, than to take on the terrifying responsibility of defining ourselves. Because defining yourself requires courage. It requires looking inside and deciding, regardless of the world's opinion, who you choose to be. And that is terrifying. It is much easier to be great when someone says we are great, and small when someone insinuates that we are small. The trap is subtle. It starts in childhood when parental love seems to depend on behavior. If you are good, mommy will be happy. If you get good grades, daddy will be proud. Children learn that existing is not enough. You have to deserve to exist. You have to constantly prove your worth. School intensifies the process. Grades, medals, rankings, comparisons. The educational system creates little addicts of external approval. Children who learn to measure their own worth by the number of gold stars stuck in their notebooks. And when that child becomes an adult, they continue to seek gold stars. Only now the stars are called promotions, salaries, likes on social media, praise from the boss, envy from friends, approval from parents who never learned to give unconditional love. The cruelest part is that this approval is never enough. It is never permanent. It always needs to be renewed, earned again, proven once more. It is an endless cycle of growing and shrinking, inflating and deflating, rising and falling, an emotional roller coaster that turns life into an exhausting performance. And those who watch this performance do not see the real person. They only see the character created to please. The result is profound loneliness in the midst of a crowd of applause. Because how is it possible to feel loved when the one being loved is a mask? Social media has intensified this pathology to almost delusional levels. Every photo posted is a request for validation disguised as sharing. Every like is a dose of dopamine. Every complimentary comment is an injection of self-esteem. And when the likes don't come at the expected speed, the feeling of rejection is almost physical. But there is something even more perverse about this game. Modern society has created a system where everyone is simultaneously judge and defendant. Everyone judges and is judged. Everyone approves and disapproves. Everyone grows and shrinks depending on the collective mood of a group that deep down is as lost as anyone else. It is a permanent court where innocence is impossible. There will always be someone to say that you are not good enough, thin enough, successful enough, happy enough. And there will always be someone worse off to make you feel better by comparison. There is a cruel irony in this story. The desperate search for approval, which should make us feel accepted, makes us fake. And fake people cannot be genuinely accepted because there is no authenticity to be accepted. It's like trying to hug a shadow. Sartre would say that this is a choice, even when it seems automatic, even when it seems inevitable. It is always a choice. At every moment we decide, will I define myself by my essence or by the opinions of others? Will I be who I am or who they think I should be? But here lies a truth that few have the courage to face. Perhaps the dance of approval continues because deep down there is a fear of discovering who we really are when no one is looking. What if that person is not as special as we imagine? What if they are more complex, more contradictory, more human than the carefully constructed image? The question that echoes in the silence of sleepless nights is terrifying. What is left of me when I take off all my masks? And if the answer is too scary, maybe it's better to keep growing and shrinking according to other people's opinions. If this makes you wonder how many times today you changed emotionally depending on who was in the room, maybe it's because Alice is still falling. And maybe you are too. The Mad Hatter, the March Hare, and the Dormouse are stuck at a tea party that never ends. It's always 6 o'clock. It's always tea time. It's always the same nonsense conversation. Always the same places at the table. Always the same unanswered question. Why does a raven look like a desk? Carroll knew exactly what he was doing when he created this scene. It's not fantasy. It's reporting. It's the most accurate portrayal of modern adult life ever written in world literature. The tea table is the dinner table where every night someone asks, "How was your day?" and always gets the same empty answer. It's the office table where every Monday someone asks, "How was your weekend?" and no one really wants to know. It's the bar table where at the end of every workday someone complains about the same boss, the same problems, the same frustrations in an endless repetition that everyone pretends is social life. The Hatter is at war with time. That's why the clock stopped. That's why it's always tea time. And here lies a devastating metaphor. When we stop living and start merely existing, time stops. Not chronologically, that keeps ticking relentlessly, but existentially, spiritually, emotionally. How many people wake up every morning to live exactly the same day? Same time, same route, same job, same complaints, same conversations, same TV shows, same bed, same emptiness. A routine so automated that the days dissolve into a homogeneous paste where December turns into January without anything really happening. The March Hare suggests changing places when the place gets dirty. It is the philosophy of perpetual escape. When something bothers you, you move on. New job, new city, new relationship, new gym, new hobby, new diet, new philosophy of life. Anything except questioning why all places get dirty after a while. Sartre would see this endless changing of places as an escape from existential responsibility. It is easier to change chairs than to question why you are sitting at the table. It is more comfortable to blame circumstances than to assume that perhaps the problem is not the place, but the way we inhabit any place. The sleepyhead sleeps through the entire conversation, and perhaps he is the most lucid of the three, because he recognizes, even if unconsciously, that there is nothing at that table that deserves his full attention. Sleeping is a form of passive resistance. It is refusing to participate in a farce without having the courage to get up and leave. There is something deeply disturbing about the organized madness of this table. Everyone knows they are stuck in a meaningless repetition, but they continue to pretend that it is normal. They talk about nothing, laugh at jokes that aren't funny, participate in a social ritual that has lost any connection to joy or authenticity. This is exactly how much of modern social life works. Family gatherings where everyone acts harmonious while harboring silent resentments. Work parties where colleagues pretend to be friends for a few hours. Get-togethers with friends where everyone is more interested in posting photos than in being present in the conversation. The question about the raven and the desk echoes across the table without an answer. Carroll never thought of an answer because there wasn't supposed to be one. The question exists to expose the absurdity of seeking meaning where there is none. It's like asking what is the meaning of the weekly meeting that could be an email, or the conversation about the weather that happens in every elevator, or the office party where no one really socializes. The scariest thing is to realize how this table is reproduced in every aspect of life, in work that is done without questioning its purpose, in conversations that are repeated without exchanging any ideas, in relationships that are maintained out of habit, not choice, in activities that fill time without adding life. The tea table is modern life, full of empty activities, hollow conversations, pointless commitments, routines that exist only because they have always existed. It is the empire of form over content, of appearance over essence, of movement over direction. And the scariest thing is that everyone at the table knows it. The hater knows he's mad. The hare knows that March passed months ago. The sleepyhead knows he is wasting time sleeping at a party. But they remain there, trapped in a collective representation of normality. Because leaving the table requires admitting that you have wasted years, perhaps decades, in a charade. It requires recognizing that much of what is called social life is just collective loneliness disguised as togetherness. It requires accepting that many of the people at the table are not real friends. They are just accomplices in a shared charade. There is a deep fear of discovering what happens when someone gets up from the eternal tea table. Because outside, far from the safety of the familiar routine, it will be necessary to invent a life of one's own. And that requires courage that few have cultivated. Sartre would say that even this is a choice. Every day, with every invitation, with every "let's do the same thing again," a decision is made to stay at the table or get up and look for a life worth living. But perhaps the cruelest thing is to discover that after so much time at the eternal tea table, there is fear of what might lie beyond it. What if outside is even emptier than the table? What if organized madness is better than authentic loneliness? The Queen of Hearts court is the most disturbing scene in Wonderland, not because of the explicit tyranny. That is even comforting in its obviousness. What is frightening is discovering that the Queen is not only in the book. She lives inside each of us, shouting "off with his head" every time we dare to be imperfect. The Queen's voice is the one that arises every morning, listing failures with surgical precision. She is the one who turns a small mistake into evidence of total incompetence, who takes constructive criticism and turns it into a definitive verdict on one's worth as a person, who examines every word spoken during the day, looking for proof that one is inadequate, ridiculous, expendable. Sartre would recognize in this inner queen the most sophisticated form of bad faith, self-oppression, because when we internalize tyranny, we no longer need external tyrants. We do the dirty work ourselves with an efficiency that would make any despot proud. The Queen of Hearts wears no crown or scepter. She uses the voice of the mother who could never please her, of the father who only praised her when she achieved something, of the teacher who pointed out her mistakes with more enthusiasm than her successes. She uses the voice of a society that teaches from an early age that to be human is to be flawed, and that flaws must be hidden, corrected, or punished. In the inner court, there is no possible defense. The evidence is always overwhelming because the Queen is simultaneously prosecutor, judge, and jury. She knows every secret thought, every dubious intention, every moment of weakness. And she uses all of this as ammunition against the person she inhabits. Who do you think you are to dream about that? Don't you realize you're being ridiculous? Everyone can see you shouldn't be here. Off with their head. The sentence is always the same. Social death, death of dreams, death of authenticity. And the execution happens in slow motion, through self-censorship, paralysis, silencing one's own voice in favor of the voices that the Queen considers most authoritative. But Alice grows up, literally, in the story. Symbolically, in the life of anyone who one day decides to stop bowing down to imaginary queens. Growing up is not a matter of age, it is a matter of perception. It is seeing that the court is a sham, that the accusations are baseless, that the Queen's authority is illegitimate. "You're nothing but a pack of cards," Alice shouts when she finally sees the truth. And the cards fly through the air, lose their shape, reveal themselves for what they always were. Painted paper, with no real power, no substance of their own. Liberation does not come from defeating the Queen. It comes from realizing that she never had any power. It comes from recognizing that all those internalized critical voices are echoes of people who also had their own queens of hearts screaming in their heads. The wounded wounding the wounded in an endless chain of pain passed down from generation to generation. Sartre would say that this is the moment of radical freedom, when you realize that you always had a choice. It was always possible to question internal authority. It was always possible to say no to the voices that diminish you. It was always possible to choose which thoughts deserve attention and which should simply be observed and dismissed. But there is something deeper to this liberation. It's not just about silencing the Queen of Hearts. It's about discovering who emerges when she stops shouting. Because after years of hearing only internal criticism, it can be scary to discover that there is an authentic voice of your own waiting to be heard. That voice isn't perfect. It doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes it's insecure, contradictory, human. But it's real. It's true. it's yours. And maybe that's exactly what the world needs. Not another person pretending to be perfect, but someone brave enough to be genuinely human. Alice wakes up at the end of the story. But waking up isn't a return to normal. It's an entry into a reality where she knows that Wonderland has always existed, always will exist, and that the difference isn't in escaping it, but in learning to navigate it with awareness, because life will continue to be absurd. People will continue to be contradictory. The world will continue to make no sense. But now there is a choice, to live as a victim of the absurd or as the author of one's own story within the absurd. And maybe that's exactly what waking up means. Discovering that freedom is not about finding a world that makes sense, but about deciding what meaning to give to the world we find. The Queen of Hearts can keep screaming, but now we know we don't have to obey. And perhaps that is the only revolution that really matters, the one that takes place within one's own mind. When one decides that one's voice is worth more than the chorus of internal critics one has inherited from the past. Which of these internal voices do you recognize as most active in your life? Write it here in the comments. If you made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and apply this knowledge to your life, the codes of the White Rabbit are ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours, count on me, and follow the White Rabbit.